what are those mindsets and behaviors that you think would really help someone develop in order to really build that kind of agency?
Yeah. Well, number one is starting with the clear understanding that you are responsible for your career journey, career path, etc. So many people get frustrated because my leader didn't do this, my manager didn't do that, the company. Those things may be true, but if you are putting your career path, your progression in somebody else's lap and expecting that if you just work hard and put your head down, that you're going to get tapped when it's time, you are going to be very frustrated and very disappointed, because you have to look up, you have to look forward, and you have to own your path forward.
Welcome to What If with Leslie Grandy. There's a growing tension in organizations right now between the language of efficiency and the reality of being human. Companies are investing billions in technology designed to make work faster, smarter, and more predictive. At the same time, they're still trying to understand how to invest in the people who make that technology matter. In boardrooms and leadership meetings, human capital gets described as the greatest asset a company has. Yet when pressure hits, the way people are selected, developed, moved, or let go often reveals a very different set of beliefs, behaviors, and priorities. At the individual level, this moment is forcing a parallel shift. Employees can no longer assume that effort alone will translate into opportunity or security. Owning your value has become an active practice rather than a passive expectation. Agency now means understanding what you uniquely bring, articulating how you create impact, and continually investing in the capabilities that compound over time. It requires people to see themselves not as a role or a title, but as a set of transferable strengths that can move with them, adapt with them, and grow with the changing demands of work. When people understand and communicate their value clearly, they become better partners in shaping their careers and more resilient participants in organizations that are themselves in constant motion. In an AI-driven environment, that sense of agency becomes even more critical. As automation absorbs more execution and analysis, the differentiator shifts towards judgment, creativity, adaptability, and the ability to direct technology rather than be directed by it. The employees who thrive will be those who take ownership of how they work with AI, how they build creative capacity and critical thinking skills, and how they position their uniquely human contributions as a force multiplier rather than something at risk of being replaced. This episode sits inside that tension. It explores what it means to treat people not as an expense, but as a compounding source of value. It considers how leaders make decisions about talent in moments of growth and contraction, how individuals maintain agency in environments that can feel ambiguous and unpredictable, and how organizations can rethink talent development, mobility, and culture in a world where AI is reshaping what work looks like. Underneath all of it is a central question about the future of work. If technology continues to automate more execution, what becomes more important about being human inside an organization? And how should both leaders and employees respond to that shift? My guest, Dr. Cynthia Benson Mercer, is particularly well positioned for this conversation because her career has been dedicated to helping organizations see people differently. She works at the intersection of strategy, leadership, and workforce investment, translating the language of business performance into the language of human potential, where agency is a core driver of growth rather than a nice to have or an afterthought. This conversation is ideal for this moment when many leaders are trying to reconcile rapid technological change with the need to build resilient, engaged organizations that can navigate ambiguity with curiosity, confidence, and imagination. I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to What If with Leslie Grandy. My guest today is Dr. Cynthia Benson Mercer, a globally recognized human capital strategist, USA Today best-selling author, speaker, and board certified executive coach with more than 30 years of experience transforming how organizations invest in their people. Dr. Cynthia partners with executives and leadership teams across public, private, nonprofit, and multi-industry sectors to align talent strategy with business growth. Her most recent book, Human Capital Investment Strategy, reframes human capital as the most overlooked driver of competitive advantage. And Dr. Cynthia was recently named one of MSN's top 10 self-made women to watch in 2026. Congratulations on that, and welcome to the podcast, Cynthia.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks for that nice introduction as well.
I'm happy to have you here. And before we dive in, for listeners who may be meeting you for the first time, how do you usually describe the work that you do and the problems you care most about solving?
Yeah, I think in a nutshell, my job is to help identify and unleash the potential in people. And I help women do that by developing more agency around their careers. And I help leaders and organizations do that by investing more deeply in the human capital that they're privileged to have serving in their organizations.
So in your experience, this approach to human capital is really fascinating to me. And I'm wondering what you see as the part that most organizations underinvest in, and why does a gap persist if it's such a competitive advantage to really invest in your human capital?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to just traditional thinking. I often say that CEOs and leaders are frequently saying people are our greatest asset. And I believe that they believe that. I mean, I don't think that they're making it up. The reality is, though, that there's this fundamental difference in how we think about financial capital and human capital. We invest in bricks and mortar, we invest in technology, we invest in those kinds of things. But still, when it comes to people, when budgets are tight, people are often the first place that we cut. And then we have to hurry up and hire. I think that there's too few leaders and organizations that are looking at how to quantify the return on that investment, recognizing it is truly a compounding investment, but absent looking at it that way and really doing the math, I think the reality is, it is most organizations' most expensive line item is payroll and healthcare and those kinds of things. So it feels like a labor burden more than it feels like a compounding asset.
And so one of the thoughts I had is that it might feel to some that there's a danger in framing employees as a value or an asset, because it shifts organizations thinking towards a more transactional relationship than a human relationship. And so how do leaders avoid reducing people to just that kind of line item on the balance sheet that you described? I mean, they represent it, and there's value in recognizing how large that line is, but it could subtly shift someone's perspective on what that is and the people behind that number.
Yeah, Leslie, I am so glad you asked that question. And here's why. When I initially named the book, I wanted to just call it what it is. I used a financial framework to help executives who think in the language of business to appreciate the compounding asset that people's human capital are. So I was really intentional, but I will say, not without pause, I worried that will some, just based on the title, do exactly what you're asking about? Is there that fear or that worry that people will sort of think about individuals purely as numbers or commodity, right? So I ran it by a lot of folks. Here's the big differentiator. You have human capital. I have human capital. Every person listening has human capital. We have agency over our human capital. So we're not a widget, right? We're not a commodity that doesn't have agency. And so I think what businesses need to understand is, yes, there's human capital. And I define that as will, ability, skills, knowledge, and natural talent, right? We all have the components. Companies need that. And to the extent they invest in Cynthia's, Leslie's, person listening's human capital, they can appreciate all of these compounding results. The difference is you and I and everyone listening, we can take our human capital someplace else. And so when you think about it, not as a commodity, that it's something that is purely in the interest of and at the discretion of the organization, especially in today's environment. The reality is they are investing in you to come serve in their organization, to bring your best self. And the value of what you bring only gets greater if you feel engaged in, if you feel invested in, if you feel supported. Otherwise, unlike financial resources, you pick up your human capital and go take it to the competitor down the road. So it's actually the opposite, but it is provocative because it causes people to stop and think, it isn't the same in that there's higher risk and higher reward.
Yeah, so there's a lot in that answer. I'm going to unbundle here for a second, okay? I want to go two different directions. I'll come back to one of them. But, I think part of the reason that people have this fear or this concern around the transactional nature of seeing people as assets is that in a world of layoffs where people are removed from their jobs because of the financial efficiencies it creates, it does create some impact on the human capital that remains. I mean, we spend a lot of time talking about the people that get laid off and what happens to them and the capital that's sunk and gone when they no longer have the business. And that's, human nature that we empathize with those people. But I've also seen the people that are left behind equally impacted in terms of their agency, their fear of, what it takes to remain. Will they get caught in another wave? How do they trust leadership? So how should leaders protect the value of the human capital that remains? And what do leaders often miss in this kind of situation where they're kind of redesigning the organization in the context of a large layoff?
Yeah, I'm gonna actually take it back a little bit further because it starts with the selection process. What I offer in human capital investment strategy is if we are doing a better job on the front end, and the front end meaning two things that precede, right? One is having a human capital pro forma. So often what organizations do is they decouple strategy from workforce. So they have these big grand ideas of how they're going to grow, how they're going to expand, how they're going to increase market share, how they're going to expand margin, right? All good stuff. I'm a business person. I get it. And it makes sense. But when they don't have all of the resources in that same conversation, thinking about and strategizing, what does performance need to look like to achieve that market share? What kind of human capital do we need to achieve that margin growth? What does it need to look like? What does success look like? And how do we have the people and their respective human capital to exercise and actualize these goals? Oftentimes what happens, we make the goals and then we sort of hope HR figures the rest of it out, right? They're supposed to hire and do all the things, which is why we end up, in my opinion, in these massive chaotic hiring because suddenly we're understaffed and we just want somebody to fog a mirror, or the reverse, massive layoffs because we haven't been thoughtful from jump around what is going on in the market, what are the micro and macro economic indicators, et cetera, et cetera. So starts way back in the planning phase and should be reviewed constantly. The second thing is there is a force multiplier when you get the right people in the job. So Leslie, if I know that you have the requisite skills and knowledge for the job, not tick every box, but the requisite skills and knowledge, but you have the natural talent and the potential to excel in that particular role. And I take care for every position to be so uniquely aligned to the role with the right makeup of skills and knowledge and natural talent. We know statistically, and research supports, and it's outlined in my book, that the force multiplier is 2 and 3 times, meaning that you at peak performance are able to produce 2 and 3 times. So 2 people's worth of work. It doesn't mean to burn out and that you're working 80 hours a week. It just means you're more productive, you're more effective than the average person. Well, what does that give you? If you have a portfolio of people that can produce and ramp up multipliers more than the average, you now have the ability to scale, right? You have economies of scale. As you grow, they can take on a little more. As you downsize, you're not overstaffed. So all the bigger answer is we have to be more strategic and thoughtful about human capital from the onset so that we don't get in this vicious cycle that a lot of organizations find themselves the same time every year. There's this fear around, is there going to be another layoff? So what I would say about the people that have survivor guilt, the people that the leaders have retained after these massive layoffs, is this is the time to call an audible. This is the time to pause and really be thoughtful about who remains. How well are they aligned to the roles that they're in? Are you investing in their development so that they can continue to take on more? And how are you thinking about that in the age of AI? If you're leaner, you're going to have to be even more aware of how you're going to utilize those resources differently. And frankly, you may or may not have kept all the right people. You may have inadvertently laid off some of the individuals whose human capital is exactly what you need going forward.
I can't help but relate my personal experience to what you're describing. I was at Amazon for 2 years, and as you probably know, the Amazon interview process is arduous, if I'm being kind, and incredibly difficult to make it through all the rounds to get the offer. I remember it feeling like the hardest interview cycle I'd ever been on. Yet when my team was hit with layoffs, my leader told me the reason my team was getting laid off was a product was being discontinued, but it turned out it wasn't the product the people he laid off worked on. So there was a gap in understanding what my team actually did. He came in during the 2 years that I was there and I transferred to him, but there was no one else in the enterprise that educated him to what those people were actually doing when they were told they were laid off because of a discontinuing product, which wasn't theirs. And so that disconnect, right, that sense of it's so hard to get in the door, they do put that investment up front in cultural fit, in intellectual capacity, not just in experience, right, in behavioral approach, right, to challenge and change. And they put all that in. And then at the back door, right, when they're showing you the exit, there seems to be a gap both in recognizing you put that effort in and qualified these people. And then in this particular case, letting them go because they say they are no longer needed on a product that wasn't theirs. And so what that type of, I agree, the upfront investment is critical, but I think the follow through is where so many people miss what they're creating, not just for the people that leave. I mean, they knew they were going to go even if you gave them the wrong reason. They weren't going to be able to, appeal the decision. Hey, that wasn't me. No, we picked you. So now it does feel very personal, right? And then the people who are left behind are very confused, right? Because they didn't see it. So what is it that leaders are missing in those situations? Because the front door, I agree with you wholeheartedly, should have prevented the backdoor experience.
100%. And such a good example, by the way, Leslie, because it's such another missed opportunity. You alluded to it. Think about the time, energy, and investment that goes into bringing the right person on. Let's say that is following all the best practices that I outline in my book. And so they're really bringing on the right person for the role, right? Certainly sounds like it. And yet they're not using that same rigor and that same discipline when they are offboarding. So let's take it for just a moment. And I'm going to answer what are they missing? The reason I use the financial model is because I'm trying to use language that business leaders who didn't spend their life in HR like I did, who don't want, fluffy this and that. So when you think about a financial portfolio, if you had a portion of your financial portfolio that wasn't performing, you wouldn't just go lop something off and stop investing in just one random thing. You would be really intentional about which fund isn't performing and why isn't it performing, and do we have any data that says it's going to increase, right? We would put a lot of thought. We wouldn't just go arbitrarily in and just say, well, take me out of those three, funds. But that's what we do in layoffs. And here's the answer that I think they're missing. We treat people like boxes, and people are like puzzle pieces. This is my puzzle premise. Think about org charts, sticks and boxes. Think about job descriptions, linear boxes. Now, praise Amazon if they don't fall into the trap that most organizations do, which is a lot of arbitrary, non-predictive criteria like years of experience, where you went to school, etc. We create these boxes. The reality is, as human beings are much more like puzzle pieces. And instead of understanding all of these ways in which we can interlock, and that we don't necessarily tick 10 out of 10 things and fit in a box, but we might tick 8 out of 10 things in that and 2 in this other. Think about the individuals in your department, regardless of the reason, regardless that the product, all the reasons it doesn't even make sense. It's very possible that some of those individuals, some of their unique complementary skills, knowledge, natural talent would be a beautiful fit for something else in the organization that they wanted to double down on. And maybe there was somebody somewhere else in the organization that wasn't performing to the top of their game and maybe was misaligned. Wouldn't it have made a whole lot more sense to say, this person is misaligned, not performing. We've done all the things. Susie over here hasn't done that before, but she's got the skills and knowledge, and she's got all this beautiful natural talent. Let's cross-train her, right? But we don't put that energy into it. We don't use intentionality. We don't think about people in terms of puzzle pieces that can be moved and elegantly fit into different places. We sort of go, well, it's a box on top of a box that stacks, and then the entire Jenga just goes.
Now, I think that's wholeheartedly what happened in this case, because Amazon will encourage you to go find that other job and apply for an open position. But what you describe is much more intentional and active, and what the other approach is much more passive. Yes, there are other open positions you can apply for. You're not unable to work at the company. We just don't need you in this role. Go find that other role. That puts a burden on someone who's just lost their job to understand the context they're going to go in, or where they could be successful in a whole other division of the company, where the company, to your point, has that knowledge. The company has their performance reviews. They have a clear view of the needs in other parts of the organization, and could, in fact, rearrange the chairs to help the employee find a spot based on the fact we thought you were worth investing in at the beginning when we hired you. And so I think that intentionality is definitely what people miss at that moment.
100%. And I want to be clear, and this is going to sound, not terribly empathetic, and that's not how I mean it, but that is what's best for the business too. So it's not just about being altruistic and a good person. And I don't, poor Sally lost her job. And if I'd have been more intentional, Sally could have kept her job. If John or Sandy or whomever over here has been consistently underperforming and is misaligned and in the wrong role, and we can move the person that we're getting ready to lay off that would be a great alignment for that role, and we're not being thoughtful enough to say, let's not just be arbitrary and treat things like everything's super linear, but we're going to think about ways in which it's not just to do Sally a favor because she's a nice person and I'm a good person. It's beneficial to the company. And I think that's where I try to get leaders is, yes, it's the right thing to do, because from a humanity perspective, I think it's the right thing to do. But at the end of the day, it's a win-win, because somebody who can contribute is getting the opportunity, and the organization is going to get somebody that's contributing at a higher level. It sort of just makes sense all the way around.
You're listening to What If with Leslie Grandy. If you want to activate your imagination and build your creative muscles, I've put together some free resources, including webinars, downloadable content, bonus book content, and even a GPT to help you achieve your goals. Access these free tools to start asking what if today at lesliegrandy.com/resources. Yeah, absolutely. I think given the investment that gets put up front in finding those people, it gives a longer horizon for the return on investment to occur. And I think if you're in your, financial model parallel here, I think that is a benefit, like you say, to both the company and the employee. But I think when it's not done, it does feel more transactional, right? When the person who's lost the job is removed for efficiency or the balance sheet, then it does feel a little bit less like I'm recognized for the talent and skill I bring. Which also brings me kind of to another point that you had made earlier that I wanted to circle around. What do leaders do along the way to unintentionally suppress agency so that when events like this happen, the remaining workforce is more at risk of underperforming? I'm giving you the chance to maintain your role, but at the same time, I'm not necessarily doing the things that you should see me do to feel good about staying in that role. So what are those behaviors? What are those signs?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, people need to understand as much as the company is able to share, people need to understand why things are happening. Our brains are wired to make sense of things. And absent information, people are going to create their own narrative, right? So it's really important that there's dialogue about what happened, why it happened, how the decision was made, to whatever extent is available and can be shared, so that you can avoid people creating their own conspiracy theories and their own narrative of what that is. More often than not, the narrative that people create on their own is far worse than the truth. So you're much better off just being transparent. The other thing is limiting mobility. One of the things that I'm a big fan of and that a lot of leaders struggle with is if they've retained this lean and mean talent, right? And they want to hold on to you, but you're saying, gosh, everybody's, dispensable. Like, tomorrow it could be me. You have to look out for yourself. So don't put your agency totally in the company's lap. Don't put your agency totally in the leader's lap. You're the one responsible for your career. And you need to have agency over always be upskilling, redefining, looking for what is your next. Do your day job with excellence while you are looking for and working on your next. What sometimes leaders will do is they block those inner mobility you mentioned earlier. So you might see, there's another job over in X department. I think I'd be a great fit over there. It feels like that's kind of where the company's shifting its attention. That could be really great for my career. But you work for a leader that sort of puts barriers up around that because they don't want to lose you. Because here's what leaders do. They don't want to lose you for a couple of reasons. One is you're great and you're performing. So obviously they don't want to lose you. But oftentimes in this day and age, when companies are in this flux of downsizing and layoffs and so on, is if Leslie goes to another department, they might not let me backfill her. So not only do I not want you to go because I'm going to lose your talent, which I depend on, but I also don't want you to go because I may not get to backfill you. And now how am I going to get everything done in my department? So instead of being exporters of talent, right, and saying, I want the best for you and for you to use your human capital in a way that you flourish on behalf of the entire organization. And if I'm going to have to lose you out of my department, gosh, I want to make certain that it's to another department within this company, that you at least stay with, XYZ organization instead of going to the competitor.
That's a great point. And I think you're right. I think the fear of exporting talent outweighs the personal investment you might have made also in that person. And both those things together make it less likely that you're going to encourage or support that kind of mobility. So I totally agree with that point. I think that's great. When you think about agency at its core, what mindsets and everyday behaviors do you think strengthen a person's sense that they can shape the outcomes, that they can control their destiny, that they can make things happen for themselves? I think so many times employees imagine their desire to take initiatives, but don't act on it, and they don't feel they can. So, what are those mindsets and behaviors that you think would really help someone develop in order to really build that kind of agency?
Yeah. Well, number one is starting with the clear understanding that you are responsible for your career journey, career path, etc. So many people get frustrated because my leader didn't do this, my manager didn't do that, the company. Those things may be true, but if you are putting your career path, your progression in somebody else's lap and expecting that if you just work hard and put your head down, that you're going to get tapped when it's time, you are going to be very frustrated and very disappointed, because you have to look up, you have to look forward, and you have to own your path forward. So the very first thing is to realize you have to take your agency back. If you're expecting somebody else to do it for you, I hear people say, well, there's no career path. Create a career path. Create a career path. So number one, you own it, first and foremost. Number two is get clarity on what is your next. What is your aspirational next? Whatever that is, it may be a promotion. It could be a lateral move. It could be staying with the organization. It could be changing organizations. It could be serving on a board. It could be getting a certification. Whatever your aspirational next is, identify it, be clear about it, pick a date certain by when you want that thing to be true. And then you work a plan even if it's 7 minutes a day, you work a plan every day. You're investing in progressing toward that aspirational goal. So you don't wait till the kids go off to school or the spouse or significant other gets their dream job. You start working on your future today. You do your day job with excellence, but you're working incrementally toward that aspirational next. That's the second thing. And the third thing is you put those aspirations into the universe. What do I mean by that? Certainly manifestation and those kinds of things for those that would appeal to, but I mean more intentionally and directly. Talk to, if you can, your leader about your aspirational goal. If your aspirational goal is to leave the organization or to do something else, find people you trust who can give you good counsel, who can help you on your path. But people are not mind readers. If they don't know that you're interested in a promotion, if they don't know you're interested in serving on a cross-functional team or you want to be on a board, nobody has the ability to say your name in rooms you're not. So change your mindset. So take your agency back. Be very clear on what your aspirational next is. Pick a date certain and start working toward it today. Don't kick the can down the road. And tell someone or people so that they can be listening and they can say your name in rooms that you may not be in that help you to move to your next. Too many people, women and people of color in particular, are taught to put our heads down, work hard, and wait for good things to happen. And the world passes us by while we are sitting there dutifully with our heads down.
As you're talking, it strikes me, I'm thinking of all these resumes that I've seen where people just list bullet points of things they did. And one of my big campaigns lately has been to try to teach people story thinking so they can develop a through line that explains what differentiates them. From an investment perspective, in your lens, I can really see how critical that is for a hiring manager or recruiter, because it doesn't, a list of bullets about I led, I delivered, I did, doesn't really show how someone gravitates towards certain problems or thrives in certain environments. And so those intangibles that make an investment have long range payback don't come through. And so I think what you're saying really is reflected in so many people's resumes these days. And it probably got worse while people lost some self-esteem in a layoff and weren't really sure why they were chosen or how they got selected. And so it's even harder now to declare it, right? That through line, that value proposition. If you can't say it, I think that's a telegraph that you really don't have agency.
100%. And you also hit on another point, which is we've been so formed to put ourselves in boxes, right? So your point about the resume, which I love, and you and I've talked recently, and I love your point of view about this. It so strikes me as, part of our shared thought leadership. We spend so much time putting the what we did rather than the how we did it. And think about it. I sort of think in pictures and graphs and that, I'm a very visual person. So for the person listening that shares my sort of visual orientation, instead of writing a resume or presenting yourself in a box, present yourself as a puzzle piece, right? What are those unique curves and components of you that are the how you did these things? How did you bring consensus? How did you facilitate, reaching a negotiation point or whatever it is? That's the differentiator. Because here's the funny thing. Companies hire based on boxes, oftentimes, but they fire based on when the puzzle piece doesn't fit. Very seldom. Now, I'm not talking about layoffs, but I'm talking about like legit termination. Very seldom is it, well, you didn't know how to do this skill or you didn't have this knowledge. It's because you're hard to get along with, or you don't meet deadlines, or you don't show up on time, right? Those aren't the things that are in a job description, but we literally have the whole thing back. But it occurs to me as you were talking about the resumes that we fall into the same trap as we emulate that dot point of the what instead of the how.
Well, and also, if you see a box, you want to be a box. So it's easier for somebody to find you and fit you. If you see you're a triangle, but the org chart has a box, they're never going to pick you. So you work extra hard to look like the box. And I think that's where also people make the mistake is they want to get hired so badly that they see what the box wants and try to be it, right? They try to see that in themselves and then pull that out. But maybe that story isn't so strong or isn't your strength. And also in that process, maybe your superpower is getting buried. And I think that that's the thing that I find most unfortunate is all things being equal. If you know how to do agile product development, I know you know how to do grooming. I know you know how to do postmortem. That's not the thing I care about, right? So how do you tell the story about how you lead in those environments that you rarely see in the resume? And I think one of the reasons I think this is getting worse, and it's going to help me pivot to my last kind of group of topics, is I do think AI is being used to look for keywords and to read resumes and to look for the check boxes in the block, right? This is a box. It has these check boxes that go with it. I'm going to go look for those, and then I'm going to raise it to a recruiter or a hiring manager. So it perpetuates this view, right, that narrative storytelling or those intangibles aren't going to get me the interview. So when AI can handle more human tasks around execution and analysis, how should people think both about telling their story and how should companies invest in people so that their capabilities compound with AI instead of being eroded by it? I think this idea that AI is your enemy when you're in a job search continues in a different way when you're inside the company, if you're not searching for a job and AI is coming for your job. So how do you advise both employees and employers to think about what AI does as a compounding factor and leverage that as a part of that manifestation that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about augmentation, right? I mean, the bottom line is I'm an optimist. I don't believe that everybody's job is going away. What we know to be true is more often it's going to be a percentage of your job, a percentage of my job, a percentage of somebody else's job. And yet they still need, 80% of what we have left to offer. I think it's a couple things. One is there's a whole bunch of work that really is framed in my book around we have to change job descriptions. We have to change the job advertisements, right? Requisitions to move away from checks and boxes. Because to your point, that's table stakes, right? If you're a nurse and you meet the nursing requirements, then you're a nurse that meets the nursing requirements. I want to know more things like what is your bedside manner and, how do you get along with others, et cetera, et cetera. So part of it is we systematically need to make some pretty significant changes. But what I at the core, what I think organizations and people need to do, let me start with the individual, because I think that's where the fear starts. I encourage every single person I talk to, meet with, coach, to start thinking about and articulating what is it about you that makes you uniquely human? What are your uniquely human advantages, right? It's creativity, right? From your wheelhouse. It's creativity. It's problem solving. It's complexity of conceptualization, taking lots of disparate thoughts and ideas and experiences and pulling them together to sort of make sense out of what's possible. It's empathy. It's the humanity side. And so everyone, I believe, can up level by leaning in more to the things that we've dismissed, undermined, underleveraged, undervalued. Because we've been over here ticking boxes of, well, if you don't have 3 to 5 years experience, need not apply. And the reality is maybe I have 2.5 years experience, but all of these other problem solving and, some of these other uniquely human things that are not going to be displaced by computers and technology are going to make me that much better. And so I always say that robots and humans need to learn how to cohabitate. They need to learn how to serve on the same team. You shouldn't have a job that a robot can do better. If it can be automated, then what can you bring, and start identifying that now and lean into those attributes, build those attributes, highlight, demonstrate those. And companies that don't start thinking this way right now are they're going to be left behind, because they're either doing one of two things. They're either dumping a ton of money into technology and not giving thought to the humans that, by the way, if they have, if humans are required to run their business, they're still going to need. And so there's this big disconnect, or they're on a kind of pause going, we're going to wait and see. And the ship and the trains left the station. Now, that's not to say there aren't great organizations out there that have figured it out. But when you look at the CEO data, 70% of them feel like they don't have any visibility of what's coming next. And so what are they doing with that?
Right. So that kind of leads me to my next question, which is there's a lot of pressure for leaders to accelerate change. And at the same time, accelerated change can really impact culture. So when you think about advising leaders on protecting the cultural elements that generate value, what kind of advice do you give them about what to hold on to and what to let go of, and how to think about that choice? Because the acceleration of change may actually leave that to be an afterthought.
What to keep and what to leave out is probably a lot to do with starting there is really this notion of, is there technology that can do that better, faster, more accurately, right, with quality? And that being the case, where then do we have the privilege and the opportunity to have humans augment that to take our service, our experience to another level? A person waiting in the ER that is waiting, and maybe there's a lot of things that have been automated, future of healthcare, but somebody seeing and identifying that patient that's sitting there shivering and going and getting them a warm blanket, right? In hospitality, think about all the places that human experience show up in hospitality. And so I'm using basic examples to be illustrative, but I think in lies the opportunity for leaders to think about If we can automate that, where does that then give us this opportunity to deploy human capital differently in a way that really accelerates or amplifies or makes better the guest experience, consumer experience, et
So
cetera?
how do you translate that into culture and values in the culture? Like, are you suggesting maybe they do sort of an assessment of the cultural values and which ones still make sense to maintain in an automated world? Is that, and then double down on those, or is there an overt approach to making that call?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. It should 100% start with your company's values and mission. 1000% start with. I spent almost 13 years in Catholic healthcare, very clearly guided by our sense of values and our sense of our mission in that organization. Everything was bumped up against how does this impact not only those we serve, but the employees that serve within this health system, right? From a dignity, respect, et cetera. So absolutely starting there. I think the biggest thing of change though, Leslie, is and where culture comes in is picking and choosing is probably rather dependent on what it is you're changing and to your point, your organization's culture and how true you are committed to your values and your mission, et cetera. The bigger thing I find with change is where it breaks down is how are we communicating it? How are we modeling it? And how are we reinforcing it? So when change is happening, and I see breakdowns in these three elements all the time, we do a pretty good job normally of communicating it. Although I will say most organizations struggle with it's fairly clear at the top, and the deeper you get in the organization, the more diluted the communication becomes. So, that's the first thing is communicating through the organization so that people understand what is the change? Why is it happening? How am I impacted? At the role level. Number one. Number two, leaders have to model the change. So if I'm expecting you to behave differently, do something differently, act differently, process something differently, as a leader, I have to be modeling that so that now people see that, okay, that's the change. You've talked about it, but I also see it happening, right? And where the biggest change, where change breaks down the most and has the biggest opportunity to be a win or a fail is in reinforcement. If I catch you doing something right that's consistent with this change, like coming to me and saying, hey, Cynthia, I've been going through my job and looking back at my past week, and I've identified at least 3 things that I think we can automate. Now, if the change is let's automate as much as we can so that humans can do higher level thinking and higher level work, I'm going to celebrate you. I want to, in whatever way you like to be motivated, I want to celebrate Leslie and say, that is amazing. I don't want to penalize you. I don't want to go, now your job's in jeopardy because you just found 3 things we can automate. I want to celebrate that. I want to double down on that. At the same time, if I find somebody's over here resistant to the change and going back to the old way of doing things, that needs to be addressed. We need to be pulling that person aside and saying, hey, Tommy, I see that you're still doing it this way. Remember that this is the new way we're doing it, and get that person on path. That's where it breaks down. We sort of install instead of implement. We go, here's the change. Here's your toolkit. And then we turn around and we go on the next shiny thing. And everybody, if they understand it or they don't understand it, if they've seen it modeled, they kind of decide whether or not they're going to move forward. And that disrupts culture, because what does the culture become? It becomes whatever the majority are doing, which can be rather dysfunctional.
As I'm tracking what you're saying, if there's a cultural value around employee capital and how employees are valued or what employees have permission to do, if it doesn't manifest through the change, then the culture itself will change regardless of that sign on the wall.
Yeah, I'll give you a very practical example. The whole my new book is in 2 sections. Section 2 is all change management, because implementing a human capital investment strategy is a heavy lift. It is not an overnight. It is a long-term commitment, and you have to have the intestinal fortitude to get through it. It's a big lift. And it doesn't get put on HR's plate. It takes your entire leadership team, starting at the CEO. The second section is all dedicated to change. And here's why. If the change is, we're going to stop focusing so much on all of these arbitrary things like years of experience and what school you went to and blah, blah, blah. And we're going to focus more. We're going to say, as long as you meet the minimum criteria, we're going to roll our dice on talent. If somebody goes through a predictive, validated talent assessment and they have talent that aligns well, their puzzle piece aligns well to this unique role, we can teach the skill and knowledge because, and we're going to place our bet on talent. It's a big change because traditional thinking doesn't support that. If then I, as a leader, continue to hold out for people that have certain years of experience and won't look at resumes that they haven't done the job long enough, or they went to a school I don't like or whatnot, what happens to the culture? Culture is who we select, who we develop, and who we promote. So we can have a mission statement, we can have values, and we can say we're kind and friendly and inclusive and diverse and loving and all the things. But if what we really value and what we really reward and recognize and how people get promoted and who gets hired are based on arbitrary criteria and getting the performance and leaving bodies in their wake, then that's really the culture. Because every one of those people are behaving in a way that's getting rewarded. And so the underlying message is, well, that's what it says on the wall. But the way you get promoted around here is you get numbers at all costs.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. That's a step a lot of leaders miss, right? The things on the wall and sort of, bolted on in big letters, and they think it's what they still stand for. But as you point out, the behaviors don't model them in the process of change. And so then the employees invent a culture based on what not what's on the wall, but what they see and hear. So I totally appreciate that. If organizations truly take a long-term look an investment of human capital as an investment, what if we fast forward 5 years? What will the work look like, especially in a more AI-driven environment? How do you think about success as AI is coming in and sort of weaving into your story as well? What in 5 years, what happens if all those leaders did what you want? What will be different?
My vision is that we live in a world where every single person is recognized for having potential, right? So potential comes in all shapes, sizes, faith backgrounds, colors, you name it, right? It's indiscriminate. That we live in a world where potential is recognized in every single person, where opportunity is intentionally designed. So it's not arbitrary, it's not sticks and boxes, it's very intentional. AI gives us more opportunity to do that because it starts again, it takes a little bit of your job and a little bit of my job. Well, now suddenly we're chipping into what used to be this nice, square box. But if AI is doing 10% or 20%, now we only have 80%, how do we morph that and make that look differently? And that organizations recognize the compounding realization of what investing in human capital looks like, so that it is not relegated to, yes, you're my greatest asset until there's a budget cut. It is, you're my greatest asset. So how do I double down? We double down on technology all the time. We just buy hundreds of thousands of dollars more technology because of the promise that it's going to do all these things. What if we had that same confidence, and the data supports it? What if we had that same confidence in people to say, instead of cutting a bunch of people, I'm going to redeploy these best of the best in ways that they can work through this problem and we come out exponentially better. So, I think it's a world where we coexist with technology, that it's augmentation, and that we're able to get paid to live at the top of our talent rather than doing a bunch of stuff that is boring and not life-giving and doesn't give us a lot of intrinsic satisfaction. Let's do the stuff that lights us up get paid to do that and live into this big, amazing, beautiful talent that every single person has.
I love that sentence, paid to live at the top of our talent. I think that's everybody, it should be everyone's aspiration. Cynthia, this has been such a pleasure. The time just whipped by. I was so riveted by your perspective. And I think it's just so timely with what's happening transformatively in business and the impact of those transformations on the workforce. So I'm really glad we got to cover the ground that we did. If people want to learn more about your work, your book, what you do, where should they look?
Yes. So I'm on all the socials, but a quick way to find me is on my website at dr-cynthia.com. All the resources are there. There's a lot of free resources as well on the website that I encourage people to go take a look at, download, and you can start working on your own journey right away.
Thanks so much for joining me on this episode of What If with Leslie Grandy. It's been my pleasure to have you as a guest.
Thank you, Leslie. It's been my honor. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to What If with Leslie Grandy. If you're interested in learning more about creative leadership, or you're just looking for a way to build your creative self-confidence and agency, check out my book, Creative Velocity, at lesliegrandy.com/book and start turning your ideas into action.